Joe Biden promised to transform this country, change it more than any president had in over 100 years. He was going to create a new economy through what he called, quote, a once-in-a-generation investment in America, unlike anything we've seen or done since we built the interstate highway system. Wow, that's big. What would it cost? Well, more than $4 trillion. How much is that exactly? Well, it's more than twice the gross domestic product of the entire nation of Canada, and of course, most other countries too. At the Washington Post, they suggested that Joe Biden's promise marked, quote, the waning of the neoliberal era. Now, they described neoliberalism as centrist liberalism friendly to Wall Street, when, of course, it's not exactly that. Neoliberalism is looting with a smokescreen of race and gender politics, so you won't notice that it happened. But the Post told us, relax. Joe Biden's going to give us something even better than we've ever had. Think FDR and the New Deal, but with no downside. So that's what they were telling you a year ago, April 2021. Fast forward a year, and it's clear the Post got it just about half right. Neoliberalism has indeed waned under Joe Biden. It will not survive the Biden administration. But that's not because Joe Biden has rejected neoliberalism or found an alternative, something that will revolutionize America like the interstate highway system. No, it's because Joe Biden embraced neoliberalism, and in so doing reminded the rest of us, tens of millions of Americans, that it's horrible, that neoliberalism serves the interests of virtually no one. It's a cover for the distribution of wealth, a distribution that has become more lopsided in our age than in any age ever. It is a shocking discredit to capitalism. It's not actually market capitalism, it's something controlled and grotesque. So anyone who thinks about this for about 30 seconds gets the point immediately. They don't want you to think about it, and that's why Biden did what they always do. Tried to divide the country along racial lines, make you hate your neighbor so you won't think about where the money's going. He did what Barack Obama did, but much less artfully. Here's Joe Biden warning us that the biggest threat to America is not the fact that you can't afford groceries or that a tiny number of people is richer than anyone in human history. No, the real threat to you is white supremacy.
According to the United States intelligence community, domestic terrorism from white supremacists is the most lethal terrorist threat in the homeland. We know now we must confront and defeat political extremism, white supremacy, and domestic terrorism. Don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists. White supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat.
White supremacy! He has no idea what he's even saying. He's just reading a script that's been around a long time, since at least Occupy Wall Street, a little over a decade ago. Neoliberal politicians and media outlets began ranting about race constantly around that time to get you to stop thinking about what they were actually doing, and for a long time, it worked. But it can't work forever because it's not true. They've been telling you for a decade that white supremacy is the real threat, but if you read the news, you know that's probably not true. You've seen a lot of mass killings recently, and none of them have been motivated by so-called white supremacy. It's a little bit more complicated than that. All of a sudden, you see people attacked in race-based crimes, but it's not the storyline that they have approved. It looks exactly the opposite of what they've been telling you. Of course, a black nationalist mowed down an entire parade full of Christmas celebrators in Wisconsin, right? Another killed a Capitol police officer just after Joe Biden took office. And then recently on the New York City subway, an avowed black nationalist opened fire in a crowded car. Then a BLM activist tried to assassinate a guy running for mayor in Kentucky. Again, it doesn't mean that the country has an epidemic of black supremacy, but it does mean that the constant harping on race, dividing us by skin color, telling some people that they are hated by the country itself, has consequences. The Democratic Party has embraced a Wall Street-approved theme, a talking point, about white supremacy. And to this day, neoliberals are trying to salvage that, to convince you, no, it's really true. And that's why Merrick Garland has never announced a probe into anything other than white supremacy. It's why General Mark Milley isn't reading books about anything other than white supremacy. So the talking point may be fake, but they're continuing to throw it at you. At this point, Joe Biden is not just inventing racial crimes and attributing them to millions of people who did nothing wrong. He's also inventing entire new genders, too. And this is another smokescreen. So first it was people should hate each other based on their skin color. Now it's let's leave the entire population wondering what a woman is. Here's Joe Biden defending something called trans senior citizens. Watch.
We're committed to advancing transgender equality in the classroom, on the playing field, at work, in our military, in our housing and healthcare systems, everywhere. There's always more work to do to end the epidemic of violence against transgender women of color and girls of color, to ensure transgender seniors can age with dignity, to parents of transgender children. Affirming your child's identity is one of the most powerful things you can do to keep them safe and healthy.
Ensuring that trans seniors live with dignity. Well, who's against that? Nobody's against that. Everybody is for it. But people watching this might wonder, well, what about every other kind of senior? What about the rest of the population that has diminishing hopes of retiring with dignity and higher than ever chances of retiring in poverty? Yeah, that's not even addressed. Instead, they're pushing the story on you so you don't even have time to think about it. We now have a trans admiral. Well, the good news is people are rejecting this because it serves no one. It does not uplift anybody. It makes the population hate each other. So our leaders don't understand that. They don't understand that their ideas have been rejected by the population. Corporate media, which carries the ideas forward into the living rooms of America, doesn't understand it either. But the reality may wake them up. You're seeing it happen again and again, the rejection of neoliberal ideas. Consider the collapse of CNN Plus. According to Axios, quote, executives bucketed CNN Plus's potential audience into three groups with various models of overlap. 29 million CNN superfans, they estimated, 24 million subscription video on demand fans, if people want to pay more for anything, and 36 million global news consumers. So think about those numbers for a second. CNN convinced itself it had 29 million superfans. That's even less plausible than 81 million votes in a presidential election. And it turned out to be completely disconnected from reality. In the end, CNN Plus got about 10,000 viewers. Why? Because people don't really want to pay to watch that crap, to be called bigots or learn about trans senior citizens. It has nothing to do with their lives. And they know for a fact it won't improve them. So what are they listening to? They're listening to people like Joe Rogan. Why? Not because of his political agenda, but because he's interesting and he's curious and he noticed the world changing all around him and he wants to know what the hell's going on. And so does everyone else. And that's why Rogan gained millions of subscribers since CNN tried to have him fired a few months ago. At the same time, the company that employs Joe Rogan, the streaming service Spotify, had to, and you may not have seen this story, offload the Obamas, to whom they had paid millions and millions of dollars. Why? Because no one wanted to watch the Obamas either. Because they had nothing to say. Because they're banal. They're not interesting in any way. So take 3 steps back. What are we watching here? We're watching the end of neoliberalism and its core plank, the thing it depends upon to survive, which is corporate control over media and hence your brain. They need to control what you think or you will reject them. But increasingly, they're not able to because censorship, thank God, is dying. And we can credit, to some great extent, Elon Musk for that, the richest man in the world. He recently bought Twitter. Now, polls made it very clear that Americans support this. Why? Not because they want another billionaire to own another media property, but because, and the Harvard-Harris poll found this, a majority of Americans understand that Twitter was a force for censorship, a force for control over the population. And it turns out most people, since they live in this country and they're citizens, would like some say in how they're governed. So they want to give their opinions out loud without being punished for it. Therefore, they are glad that Elon Musk is promising to end the censorship of Twitter. So why are people rejecting this? Well, part of the reason is that while Joe Biden was making a fool of himself, going on about trans seniors, Americans are getting poorer and they feel it. There's no hiding it. Many Americans can barely afford to live in their own country. Watch.
Year to year, meat, fish, poultry, and eggs jumped almost 14%. Used cars and trucks up 35%. Gas up 48%. Blame a tangle of pressures. Supply chain issues. Trucks waiting up to 30 hours to cross from Mexico into Texas. Labor shortfalls.
Oh, a food shortage. How many revolutions have been spurred by food shortages? Most of them. And the food that is available is quickly becoming hard to afford for people. But the Biden administration barely acknowledges this. Their solution? Flood the country with 2 million new people. They might all be good people. It doesn't matter. The volume is what matters. More people, fewer resources. What does that look like? More shortages. Here's our own Bill Melugin.
In Eagle Pass, Texas, it's a scene that plays out every morning. Just after sunrise, migrants make their move, wading across the Rio Grande, entering the U.S. illegally, and they continue to come from all around the world. They come in historic numbers. CBP in March alone reporting more than 221,000 migrant encounters. That's the highest number in more than 2 decades. The river can be deadly. Fox News this week witnessed the bodies of multiple drowned migrants being pulled from the water. On the International Bridge in Eagle Pass, as the end of Title 42 on May 23rd looms, groups of migrants are expelled back to Mexico every 30 minutes.
Right. So it's just supply and demand. If you're having a dinner party and you had just enough food for 12 people, but you invited 1,200 people, that would mean not everyone got to eat, right? Competition for scarce resources like food and gasoline is a huge, huge problem. But there are other effects, by the way. While most people coming over the border are simply looking for a better life, they're good people, they want to work. Some of them aren't good people and they don't want to work, they want to sell fentanyl. And they are. And that means a lot more overdoses.
Georgia health officials say fentanyl has infiltrated street drugs. Just a few days ago, the GBI and Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office made a major bust. Among the drugs, a quarter kilo of fentanyl. They say that equals more than 100,000 deadly doses.
6 men were rushed to the hospital Thursday. Investigators saying they overdosed on a cocaine cocktail laced with fentanyl.
The Seattle field office of the DEA has confiscated 1.1 million fentanyl pills, 200 guns from cartel drug traffickers in the Northwest just in the last 4 months.
The problem, they say, fentanyl is too affordable and too available.
It's just specific here because people can come here all over and get it dirt cheap and not get no consequences here.
So it's just awful. People are dying, and not just in San Francisco. Life expectancy, average life expectancy for American-born citizens is down. So if there's any measure of failure, it's that. And the truth is, it doesn't matter what Biden says or any of our political leaders say. You can say whatever you want, but people still live here and they still have eyes to see. And if their lives are getting worse, they know that you're lying and that the beliefs you are selling are hollow. And the core belief is neoliberalism. That's been completely discredited and killed by Joe Biden. If he's achieved anything as president, it's that. In 1980, which wasn't that long ago, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America. It had the highest wages, it had the best health care and education. It also had, by the standards of the region anyway, a famously stable democracy. Then came an energy crisis, and Venezuela wound up with inflation. At times, it reached 100% a year. Inflation makes people poor, so in a very short time, the poverty rate in Venezuela doubled. By 1995, 66% of all Venezuelans were impoverished. Getting poorer tends to make voters radical, so inevitably Venezuela got radical politics. You know what happened next. Venezuela is now rated one of the most miserable places on planet Earth. A few years ago, citizens in Caracas were reduced to eating zoo animals. There was no food, and for that matter, there was no electricity. So in just half a lifetime, an advanced society had reverted to the Stone Age. The United States is not in danger of becoming Venezuela next week, but we are moving closer to it. Inflation is a big part of the reason. Of all the economic crises a country can face, inflation is the most dangerous. Inflation doesn't just make people poor, it totally destroys their confidence in their leaders, the authorities who issued the now worthless currency they're using for toilet paper. Inflation is not an act of God like a drought or hurricane, it's an act of negligence like drunk driving. It is proof that the people in charge are reckless and stupid. That's why inflation tends to topple governments. Once you get inflation, there's no pretending you've done a good job. You have not done a good job, and everybody knows it. So you can see why the Biden administration is very worried about this. Joe Biden has historically low approval ratings. Voters say inflation is their top concern. Those two facts are directly related. So Biden's most pressing task right now is reassuring Americans that he understands their suffering under inflation and under a rapidly worsening economy, and that he's got a plan to fix it. If he can't convince Americans of that, it may be a long time before we have another Democratic president. Thankfully, Joe Biden has a plan, or at least a new publicist, a silver-tongued wordsmith/policy guru called Karine Jean-Pierre. It is Karine Jean-Pierre's job to take this message of economic hope to the American people and save the Biden administration. She started Monday. Here were her first words from the podium.
I am obviously acutely aware that my presence at this podium represents a few firsts. I am a Black, gay, immigrant woman, the first of all three of those to hold this position.
So that was a little confusing. It wasn't actually about America, it was about her. But still, we learned that Karine Jean-Pierre is a black lesbian, the first ever in history, she reminded us, to hold this particular job. Listen carefully. That shattering you hear in the background, it's 1,000 glass ceilings cracking simultaneously into millions of tiny pieces and then being swept by the custodians of tomorrow into the trash bin of bigotry and hate. Soon they'll be trucked to a landfill and buried. It's a new day, America. How do you feel? You still can't afford to have your refrigerator fixed or go to the dentist. On the other hand, Karine Jean-Pierre has good news for you about herself. Karine Jean-Pierre has just reached a highly significant personal goal, and understandably, she is brimming with self-esteem. Congratulations, Karine Jean-Pierre. Your promotion is America's promotion. Hope it feels good. You're going to want to hold on to that sensation, the one you're now experiencing, and treasure it in the days ahead like a hand warmer as America becomes poorer than you ever imagined possible. And it is. As of tonight, parents across the country can't find baby formula. Oh, no big deal. Well, it is actually a big deal because as a result of that, several children have just been hospitalized in the state of Tennessee. Fertilizer prices, meanwhile, have hit record highs. That will mean food shortages around the world, famine in some places, starvation. It'll mean shortages here. Food inflation, Bloomberg reports, will, quote, leave no household unscathed. And then gas prices also just hit an all-time high. They're not going down. Mike Jennings, the CEO at a major refiner, says gas prices will stay high for the foreseeable future. Quote, I don't see any signs of it ending soon or well. And that's true of inflation across every major sector of this economy. Axios reporting tonight that, quote, inflation is pushing prices higher and higher, and some of those costs may never come back down to the levels Americans were accustomed to before the pandemic. More than half the CEOs in this country publicly predict that recession is imminent. That's what they're saying in public. Imagine what they're saying in private. Morgan Stanley says there's a 27% chance we get a recession in the next 12 months. That's up from 5% just 2 months ago. So that's scary. But the scariest fact of all, we appear to be running out of energy. Congress never passed the Green New Deal, but we somehow got it anyway. And here are the results. According to the Wall Street Journal, quote, from California to Texas to Indiana, electric grid operators are warning that power generating capacity is struggling to keep up with demand. That gap could lead to rolling blackouts during heat waves or other peak periods as soon as this year. In other words, turn on your air conditioning in August and it won't work, and neither will your lights. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which oversees the energy grid in the Midwest, says it's preparing to, quote, take emergency measures in advance of capacity issues this summer. In other words, no more electricity. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which oversees energy output in the country, released an assessment this year saying the entire western U.S. is, quote, at risk of energy emergencies due to the limited supply of electricity available for transfer. So this has never happened. It's happening now. Why? Why is this happening? Well, according to the Wall Street Journal, quote, the challenge is that wind and solar farms, which are among the cheapest forms of power generation, don't produce electricity at all times and need large batteries to store their output for later use. Now, that's not only a big problem, it turns out to be an insurmountable problem, given that nearly half of new electricity generation capacity in the U.S. last year, 42%, was from land-based wind farms. put a lot of eggs in the wind basket. And some states like California have pledged to use 100%, quote, renewable energy by 2045. So maybe we will have scientific innovation by 2045 that make that possible. If we don't, California will have even less power than it does now. You didn't think growing up in this country there would come a time when they couldn't keep the lights on. Now that time is here. That's shocking. But if you're upset about it, we'd like you to pause and return your attention to the fact, and we're going to say this slowly so it can sink in, our new White House press secretary is a black lesbian. Oh, hooray! The White House press corps was duly impressed, tamed, in fact, which was the point of telling them that. But our Peter Doocy did have one question. What is the Biden administration doing about our collapsing economy, and how exactly is the plan to increase taxes on American citizens going to help them pay for things? Here's how Karine Jean-Pierre responded.
How does raising taxes on corporations reduce inflation?
Are you talking about a specific tweet?
He tweeted, "You want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share."
Look, we have talked about this past year about making sure that the wealthiest among us are paying their fair share.
But how does raising taxes on corporations lower the cost of gas, the cost of a used car, the cost of food for everyday Americans?
So look, I think we encourage those who have done very well, right? Especially those who care about climate change, to support a fair tax code that doesn't charge manufacturers, workers, cops, builders a higher percentage of their earnings, that the most fortunate people in our nation, and not let that stand in the way of reducing energy costs and fighting this existential problem, if you think about that as an example.
Now, you wouldn't have thought it was possible to take talking points that stupid, that barely literate, that childish, and make them even dumber. And yet that's exactly what she did. Are you still not convinced that Joe Biden knows how to handle inflation? Did that rattle your confidence rather than bolster it? Then honestly, there's nothing we can do for you at this point. You're beyond reach. In fact, you know what you are, and you may have seen this coming? You're a racist. That's what we call people who continue to ask complicated, long questions about Joe Biden's economic program. They're racists, and getting rid of them is America's greatest problem. Here's MSNBC to remind you.
Mitch McConnell won't come close to delivering the condemnation of white supremacy that Joe Biden did today. Because what? Because they make up part of the Republican coalition? I mean, what is the explanation for why not?
This is always what the right does to appease the white supremacist movement by saying, hey, free speech. Don't touch speech.
Extremism and white nationalism, which is not only on the rise in the far dark corners on the internet, but the rhetoric in a tamer version, an attenuated version, I say, is now pretty mainstream in the Republican Party.
Did you hear that from the comb-over guy? Free speech is white supremacy, says Chuck Todd. It's white supremacy, free speech. Talking out of turn, reading your own script rather than the one that Chuck Todd provides you, is white supremacy. And that means if you're upset about food shortages or blackouts, you're a racist, 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 racist. There you are, complaining again about the precipitous decline in your standard of living. That's always the first sign of a racist. Oh, you don't like crime? You don't like litter? You don't like inflation? You're against public urination in New York City? You know what you are? You're a bigot, pal. Stop complaining. You and your free speech. Gayle King of CBS is a journalist, a talented and highly awarded broadcast journalist, so she knows exactly how racist you are. You're so racist that Gayle King's family members won't even go outside anymore. Watch this.
I'm so afraid. I have a nephew who lives in the Midwest, 20-something, black man, who walks his dog, who said, I was never afraid to walk my dog. Now I'm in the Midwest, just walking around, minding my own business, thinking this could happen at any time.
Yeah, white supremacists just come out and kill them with the First Amendment. That's what happens when you walk your dog in this country. That's how bad it is. Racism against Gayle King's family may be the single biggest problem America faces right now. In fact, it is. The problem is definitely not that we're running out of energy to power civilization. That's not a big deal at all. And that's why you probably didn't read about the fact that the Interior Department just announced it is closing millions of acres to domestic energy production. Sorry, gone. Can't have the energy there. It exists, but you can't have it. You know what we can do, though? Buy it from Venezuela. Yes, we can. 20 minutes ago, they told you Venezuela was a criminal regime. Now, Venezuela's going to provide the oil. Not us. We can't. That's immoral because climate change is existential. But Venezuela can. And the United States, the Biden administration, is doing everything it can to allow the United States to buy Venezuelan oil directly. What is that up to? Don't think about that. Thinking about it is racist. It's like the First Amendment. It's white supremacy. And if you don't believe it, Karine Jean-Pierre is here to remind you.
Donald Trump is running a racist campaign. The grand wizard of the birther movement, which birtherism is inherently racist. By the way, he's a racist and a bigot, which we already knew. If it walks like a racist, talks like a racist, acts like a racist, it is a racist. And we saw all these awful voter suppression laws, which is really racism just across the country. And we have a racist president in the White House who really pushes his racism like a peacock. Because I'll say this, we knew Donald Trump was a racist. I wanted to ask you, just change the topic for just a quick second, about Donald Trump's racist tweets. Systemic racism and how that has affected our country. Donald Trump is the most outwardly racist president that we have seen in generations. This country needs to start talking about uprooting institutional racism. Fox News was racist before coronavirus. They are racist during the coronavirus. Fox News will be racist after the coronavirus.
You know what we need to talk about? Karine Jean-Pierre just told you know what we need to have a conversation about, and by conversation we mean you shut up, I talk. We need to have a conversation about how racist you are, which is very racist. So if you can't keep the lights on or go to the dentist, or if you're one of the very few people, maybe 3 in the country, who's noticed that honey prices have doubled since December, why is that happening? Shut up, racist. It feels like this country is losing control of inflation. It feels like it's getting worse. In Dallas over the weekend, a bottle of water was going for $8. That's water, which we used to get for free from the sky. Now $8. And people are paying it too. If you were thirsty in downtown Dallas on Saturday morning, you didn't really have a choice. This is not a small development. Inflation will make this country poor, and it will do it faster than anything else will. Anyone who doesn't understand that intuitively is an idiot or is irresponsible or both. If you think COVID or climate change or police brutality or Iran is a bigger threat to the United States than the devaluation of the US dollar, then you by definition should not be making meaningful decisions. You're a moron. So with that standard in mind, let's check in with our friends over at CNN to see what they're covering today on their news channel. Oh, it looks like they're planning a palace coup at the White House, just another day in Washington. Turns out CNN's researchers have discovered that Joe Biden is elderly and unpopular. Breaking news! And therefore, he's probably not the best vehicle for the ambitions of the Democratic Party going forward. Obviously, Biden isn't going to serve 2 terms, so as a public service, CNN has assembled a list of people who should replace Joe Biden. It's all pretty amusing when you think about it. Apparently, somebody in CNN's math department finally finished the complicated calculations and concluded that Joe Biden, who's already had 2 cerebral aneurysms, will be 86 years old by the end of his 2nd term. Wait, what? 86 years old? CNN had no idea Joe Biden was that old. Didn't tell us about it either. Clearly, this is not going to work. Time for someone new. That's what they're saying. And honestly, as you watch this, you can start to feel a little sad for Joe Biden. He's been in office less than a year, and already his own supporters are measuring his coffin. But of course they are. This was always going to happen. Professional Democrats are not sentimental people. They're stony-hearted realists. Joe Biden has served his biological purpose. He stopped Bernie Sanders in the primaries. He made America safe for private equity. Carried interest is still in the tax code. Mission accomplished. So it's time to pull Joe Biden off the stage before he gets even older and less popular. That's what they're thinking. It turns out supporting Joe Biden was never about any specific ideology. We on the right fell for that one. But these people have no interest in principles or ideas. Loyalty is a foreign concept to them. They care only about power. It's kind of scary, really. Thankfully, this same group is also stupid. Stupidity is their one redeeming quality. If they were smart, they'd take over the world. They're certainly ruthless enough. But thank God they can't do that because they're too limited by their own bigotries and their tiny intellects. How dumb are these people? Well, they assume that everybody else is just like them. And that's always the hallmark of true stupidity. These are the geniuses who believe Salvadoran immigrants want to be called Latinx. They can believe that because they don't talk to Salvadoran immigrants, they only talk at them. So they have no idea that the average Salvadoran has social views that are so terrifyingly right-wing, they would be banned on Twitter instantly, assuming Salvadoran immigrants actually use Twitter, which most of them don't because they're smarter than CNN anchors. Remember when Nancy Pelosi was out there a couple of years ago talking about MS-13 when they were terrorizing Salvadoran immigrant communities, and she was assuring us they were little angels? They're children of God, she said. CNN never sent a camera to an actual Salvadoran community to ask what they thought of MS-13, the people terrorizing them. What do you think we should do with MS-13? Well, cut them into small pieces and feed them to the dogs. That would have been the answer. Didn't see that on CNN. What's their views on the trans community, you'd have to wonder. They're not put that in the air either. CNN hasn't even thought about doing those interviews because they assume they don't need to. The people at CNN believe that everyone who didn't vote for Donald Trump must have the same opinions and concerns as the average dingbat trustafarian in Bozeman. They imagine a world populated entirely by people like themselves, college-educated liberals with empty personal lives. And thank God they're wrong. A world like that would be as sterile and bossy and anti-human as the White House press secretary. Imagine 8 billion Jen Psaki's. Ugh, horrifying. But in reality, humanity is far more interesting and far more, yes, diverse than that. Not that CNN has caught on. Nor do they have any idea how unpopular they are. Most Americans are not racist, no matter what you might hear, but an awful lot of them secretly do hate the nasty, uptight, self-righteous, entitled white liberals who run CNN and people like them. If you were to ask your average Trump voter, who do you really dislike? No, not that anyone would ever ask them that because nobody cares what they think, but if you were, they'd probably say to the CNN camera crew, actually, I'm not mad at black people, I'm mad at you. Dislike of that group of people, the people who have all the power in this country, is probably the deepest well of prejudice in the United States. And of course, it's totally justified. Does CNN know that? No, of course they have no idea. Wait till you see their list of replacements for Joe Biden. Each one is tailor-made to appeal to the dingbat trustafarian in Bozeman and no one else. First on the list, of course, is Kamala Harris, and that makes sense. She's the vice president. The problem is nobody likes Kamala Harris. No one has ever liked Kamala Harris, from her earliest days on the playground to her high school years in Canada to right now, which is December 15, 2021. Why is Kamala Harris so unpopular? Because here's what she's like.
And is that a socialist or progressive perspective?
No. The value of educators when they had to bring their kids. It actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage, but
yeah.
Not and said, "Where's Kamala?" And apparently they left me like a block behind. I'd fallen out the street. Oh, what's up? And I looked back up at her and I said, "Freedom."
So Kamala Harris is a charmless phony who has such total and utter contempt for your intelligence that she fully expects you to believe that her fake laugh is real. And that's bad, but honestly, it's not necessarily a deal killer in politics. No one ever called Richard Nixon charming, yet Nixon won the biggest presidential landslide in American history in 1972. So what's the difference? The difference is Richard Nixon was competent. He had skills, he could do things. Kamala Harris doesn't, and she can't. Kamala Harris is totally incompetent. She's zero skills. She's never done anything. Harris can't redecorate her own office. She tried recently and she made it uglier. So this isn't going to work. We're going to have to take Kamala Harris off the list. Sorry. So how about Pete Buttigieg? He's on the list, of course. Everyone at CNN loves Pete Buttigieg. He's just like them, except a little spicier and much more glib. Until a few years ago, Pete Buttigieg dated women. Now he's openly gay and a father and reads the Atlantic magazine and uses unintelligible buzzwords, many unintelligible buzzwords. In fact, unintelligible buzzwords are Pete Buttigieg's entire vocabulary. You want to talk like Pete Buttigieg? It's not hard. Take a phrase or issue, any phrase or any issue, and add the word racism. Bingo. You now have a promising future in the Democratic Party.
Do you think that people who support President Trump and his immigration policies are racist?
Anyone who supports this is supporting racism.
Our healthcare system
is burdened by racism. We know that our housing is burdened by racism. Our schools are burdened by racism. Yes, the uniform is burdened by racism, but it goes far beyond that.
It is a matter of concern for every American that we dismantle systemic racism before it ends the American project in our lifetime.
Oh, and roads are racist too. Certain kinds of people love this. If CNN anchors could do science, which of course they can't, but if they could, Pete Buttigieg is the candidate they would create in their basement lab. Rhodes Scholar, McKinsey consultant, no actual achievements of any kind. Pete Buttigieg couldn't even run South Bend, Indiana. He tried, couldn't. And that's not really surprising. Buttigieg has never shown any interest in improving the lives of actual people. His only real skill is talking about himself. Every presidential election cycle, you see someone like this. Democratic candidates who are in effect media creations. The New York Times pretends they could actually get elected, but no. Every election cycle, the voters laugh at these people. Ask Beto. He's been there. So Pete Buttigieg is off the list. But in his defense, whatever Buttigieg's fault, at least he's not Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is the candidate for voters who find Kamala Harris too authentic. Kamala's just too real for me. I'd rather have the manufactured version, someone who pretends to be, say, an American Indian. So if that's you, if that's what you're looking for, you're going to love Elizabeth Warren. Here she is drinking beer with the man she claims is her husband, just like a totally normal American. Totally normal. Watch this.
Hold on a sec. I'm going to get me a beer. Hey, Glover, my husband Bruce is now in here. You want a beer?
No, I'll pass on the beer for now.
I'm going to pull a stool and sit down.
I'm going to get me a beer. Oh, are you now, Elizabeth Warren? Maybe you will, but not in the White House. That's not going to fly. The truth is, if you're going to replace someone as old and familiar as Joe Biden is, you're going to need someone fresh and new, someone whose faults the country isn't already very familiar with. Maybe that's what CNN was thinking when they included Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker on the list. Unfortunately, even if you've never even heard his name before, J.B. Pritzker's faults are just too obvious to ignore. Pritzker may be the only elected Democrat in America who is unhealthier than Joe Biden. A couple of years ago, Pritzker broke his leg and then admitted he had no idea how he did it. He hasn't seen his leg since 1993. Now, we're not judging, obviously, but is this really the president you need during a COVID pandemic? J.B. Pritzker is a walking underlying condition. Plus, and not incidentally, he has destroyed the state of Illinois. Almost 13 million people live in Illinois, though thanks to J.B. Pritzker, there are far fewer of them every day. But CNN did not bother to interview a single one of them. So go ahead and wish J.B. Pritzker the best, but don't count on seeing him in the White House anytime soon. But if you're still fixated on replacing Joe Biden with a governor, CNN has a few more ideas for you. CNN is recommending Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan and Phil Murphy of New Jersey. Now you read that, and you pause, and you begin to suspect that maybe this whole list is CNN's stealthy attempt to test you, to see what you will believe. How ludicrous can they write it? Phil Murphy? Phil Murphy almost lost his job just last month. He was nearly defeated as an incumbent Democrat governor in a state that has 1 million more Democrats than it has Republicans. How much do people in New Jersey hate Phil Murphy? That's how much they hate him. But now he should be president? Come on. It feels like some pothead intern at CNN just pulled up the Wikipedia entry for Democratic governors and then copied their names into the story. That's gotta be what happened. How else did Gretchen Whitmer make the list? Come on now. You should also know that CNN recommends a former mayor. That would be Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans. Now, you'll be excited about this if you think Joe Biden's hair plugs aren't quite absurd enough. Otherwise, huh? Actually, Mitch Landrieu is a perfectly nice guy, charming and friendly. But the question is, how's New Orleans doing these days? Is it cleaner? Is it safer? Is it a better place to live? How are the schools? Come on. If you've been there, you know. On the other hand, if Mitch Landrieu is going to make the list, then why not Bill de Blasio? Why doesn't Bill de Blasio replace Joe Biden? He certainly's got the time to do it. He's unemployed. This could be Bill de Blasio's chance to turn all of America into Penn Station. What a campaign slogan that would be. De Blasio 2024, make America filthy again. We can't wait for CNN's endorsement of that. No doubt it's coming. So by this point, we're getting toward the bottom of CNN's Biden replacement list. And that's where we find the name of one Stacey Abrams. Abrams was once a state representative in Georgia. Now she describes herself as a, quote, voting rights activist, whatever that is. Electing Stacey Abrams president of the United States would amount to the single largest act of equity ever committed in the modern era. Unfortunately, it would also signal the end of the modern era. You know exactly the kind of country you would get with Stacey Abrams in charge. Is she unqualified for the job? Oh, of course she's unqualified. But she's also, and this is an extra bonus, totally delusional. To this day, more than 3 years after the fact, Abrams has never conceded that she lost the Georgia governor's race. She still claims that election was stolen from her. But wait a second, you ask. Isn't that an attack on democracy? When you challenge an election result in this country, you are, as Liz Cheney often tells us, shredding democratic norms. You might as well be living in Moscow at that point because you, my friend, are doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin. You're an insurrectionist. And yet, Stacey Abrams is not living in Moscow. She's living in Atlanta. In pretty luxurious circumstances, actually, all made possible by the huge amounts of cash she has raised fighting for, quote, voting rights. A few years ago, Abrams spent nearly $1.5 million on residential real estate for herself, despite owing the Internal Revenue Service $54,000 in back taxes. Now that is equity in action. So once again, you know precisely who Stacey Abrams is. But still, there is something about her that's not quite as repulsive as the rest of the people on CNN's list. Say what you will about Stacey Abrams. She's not synthetic. She's no Pete Buttigieg, who was clearly implanted with some kind of neoliberal master chip when he worked at McKinsey. Must stop climate change now. No, Stacey Abrams isn't really like that. She's a grifter, obviously, but there is still a spark of recognizable humanity within her. She's clearly got an active personal life. Here's an excerpt from the softcore porn novel she wrote called Hidden Sins. Over comes from our highly talented producer, Mr. Alex McCaskill, but imagine Stacey Abrams doing the same thing. Imagine Stacey Abrams standing on the west front of the Capitol building 3 years from now at her inauguration, reading her own words from Hidden Sins as she faces the slender but rigid Washington Monument. Somehow, strange as it sounds, we can imagine that. In fact, we can imagine it vividly. CNN would be thrilled by the whole thing, and we know for certain that Jeff Toobin would cover it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to support the channel, please check out my links. Noble Gold, save $100. Their food supply that lasts for 25 years could save your life. I mean, seriously, if the world falls apart and you can't get food or food spoils, My Patriot Supply is most certainly who you would want to have in your corner. I can tell you that. And if you really want a good night's sleep, check out My Pillow. Fantastic. And if you want some good, supplements, check out Boomer Products. Ladies and gentlemen, these people have stuck by my side through thick and thin as I had to deal with what I had to deal with when it comes to this channel for 5 years. When the Biden administration caught wind that I was actually having serious traction, is probably when I had 7.7 million hours watched in a 28-day period back in 2020. I cannot wait until I can talk about that situation. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Please like, subscribe, share, all that happy stuff. It helps out dramatically. If you want to help out other ways, there's all kinds of ways that you can, click on the video, super thanks and so forth and so on. Guys, it helps so incredibly much as I am going through the rebuild phase of bringing an algorithm that hid a channel for 5 years back to life. It is a freaking nightmare to do that, but the more you guys visit this channel, the more you watch my videos, the more you like them, the more you comment on them, the more you share, the more it helps the algorithm do what it's supposed to do and bring back my historical data that has to do with this channel. God bless each and every one of you, and I cannot thank you enough for being here.
Food supplies have been completely wiped out. We have our evacuation of all counties. I report complete devastation. We have a giant squall, cloud, gobbling up the other path.
There are forces in this world that remind us of how fragile we are.
We thought we were safe. We thought it could never happen to us. Then life like a fog descends upon us, blanketing our memories. Through the haze, we travel its hidden paths, lost in its secret places. And when the storm, turbulent and immovable, forces us to shelter, we remember. It calls to us, calls us back. Back to the ports and the harbors of our past. We fight the currents that pull and drag us off course, not a light or star to chart the way. And when we arrive, we don't always know it at first. The places we once loved, guised by time. Then we see it. The place we've been trying to get back to. Safe at last. We've found our way home.